The Telltale Pants is the 16th episode of the 35th season of The Simpsons. This is directed by Stephen Dean Moore, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I really enjoyed this one, but it felt very quick. It's the standard length, but when it ended, I kind of thought, well, I felt like I was only about halfway through, which I guess is a good thing because that means time flies when you're having fun, but I don't know, it just felt like not a lot happened. But that being said, as I said, I did enjoy it. It starts off with Springies, which is the Springfield Awards, and it's hosted by Duffman. Everybody's getting awards apart from the Simpsons family. And then Marge gets an award, and then she wakes up in bed surrounded by springs. And then we have a series of not great things happening to Marge, and basically she's just fed up of everything always going wrong, always being taken for granted. And then Homer gives her his trousers to repair. And Marge happens to be watching television at the time, and somebody on TV is getting a pair of trousers appraised that are identical to Homer's, and they're identical because they're Levi's with two E's. Levis. And there are various other things about the trousers that makes Marge realise these are probably the same pair of trousers, or from the same time. And the woman on the television had them appraised for $2,600. And Marge realises she could sell Homer's trousers and maybe get some money from it. And Homer ends up wearing sweatpants to work. We do have a scene in the power plant, which I guess I'll just talk about now. And honestly, I found it to be a bit random. And Homer basically saves Mr. Burns' life because he was wearing sweats and could move more freely, which I guess is an interesting point. And Burns went off on one about Oppenheimer, which I didn't care for. Smithers has dyed his hair pink because clearly he'd watched Barbie, which I did like. And that scene just felt really pointless. We also have a bit of a sing-song in this episode. And I feel like every episode, I might be exaggerating, but many episodes in this season has had a musical number. And it starts to get really boring. I love musicals. And I do love the musical-based Simpsons episodes. There are a couple of them where there are many songs in the episodes, but it seems like they're putting a song into every other episode, and it just gets old, so I hope that they don't continue with that. Anyway, back with the main narrative, the rest of my thoughts are about Marge. And she goes into this vintage clothing store, where she meets Collectible Pants Dude, who is actually Comic Book Guy's cousin. I liked him as a character. And she manages to sell Homer's trousers for just shy of $2,600, and then she begins to panic that she shouldn't spend that money just on herself. But I have to say it was a valid point when she briefly thought about putting away for Lisa's college, and Lisa remarked that it paid for, I think she said, a week of education. Slight exaggeration, but she has a point. It was barely going to cover more than a week's worth of education. And she ends up, first of all, speaking with Reverend Lovejoy to see what the Bible says about spending money on oneself. And then she goes into Spiffany's and she buys this ring for herself. And then she panics again and she tries to hide it around the house. And we're basically near the end of the episode. In the end, she realises she's going to have to live with her guilt. So she puts it on the side. And Homer, at this point, has started to realise that maybe he behaves, or he feels like he's taking Marge for granted. And I think they could have done a bit more with that. Homer just kind of seemed to realise it all of a sudden after she phoned him when he was at a baseball game. And I feel like we got from A to B really quickly and it felt a little bit unnatural. But I did like the fact that Homer did ultimately come to that conclusion. And he sees the ring. And I guess he just assumed Marge bought it and he didn't question how she was able to afford it or anything. And then he puts it on her finger, which I guess is a sweet gesture. And that's the end of that. Well, we end with Marge sitting in front of the television, watching a news broadcast about how that kind of, the stone in her ring is not ethically sourced and things, which was not the most interesting scene. It honestly feels like not a lot happened in this episode, but I enjoyed it. So it's a bit of a peculiar situation. I definitely think there's room for improvement. I feel like the scene with Homer and Mr. Burns was really boring, and they could have used that to maybe flesh out the bit a bit more with Homer coming to the realisation that maybe he takes Marge for granted, maybe Marge never gets a chance to focus on herself. She's always thinking of other people, so they could have used that time a bit better, but in general, we had a couple of sweet scenes. Honestly, it doesn't seem like the strongest episode, talking about it now, but I can't deny it. I enjoyed the experience, and I would probably watch it again. All things considered, although it's not perfect, The Telltale Pants is not a bad episode of The Simpsons.